There is no more peaceful silence in Florida. In the swamps where otters once splashed and frogs croaked, now there is only the threatening sound of scales sliding through the mud. Slippery, heavy, unstoppable. It's the sound of invaders, Burmese pythons, 20-foot-long killers brought here by people 30 years ago as exotic pets. Beautiful, quiet, obedient in terrariums. But when they grew too big, too dangerous, and too expensive to keep, the owners panicked and started getting rid of them, releasing them into the swamps, thinking the snakes would either find a new home or simply die in the unfamiliar Florida climate. No one guessed that these tropical snakes would feel perfectly fine in Florida's subtropical wetlands. Then Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992 and destroyed several snake farms, releasing thousands of these crawling predators at once. Florida became their new home. Warm, humid, full of prey, perfect conditions for reproduction. One female lays up to 100 eggs at a time. Pythons here have no natural enemies, no limits, only endless hunger and the instinct to kill. In 30 years, they have almost eaten Florida from the inside out. 90% of raccoons are gone. Opossums, rabbits, foxes, nearly wiped out. They swallow deer whole, strangle alligators, raid bird nests with chicks inside. Scientists have found 85 species of animals in the stomachs of these monsters. It's easier to name the ones they haven't eaten yet. People tried to fight back. They organized large hunts, offered rewards for every snake killed, sent armies of volunteers into the swamps. But there were too many pythons, hundreds of thousands. They are too secretive, too patient, too tough. They can lie motionless for months in hiding, waiting for prey. By 2022, it became clear people had lost this war. Florida had turned into a giant terrarium where snakes ruled the food chain completely. People had finally given up. But nature hadn't. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike back. The morning of December 15th, 2022, began like any other. Ranger Marcus Gonzalez was patrolling the northern part of the Everglades, checking trail cameras and signs of python activity. The sun had barely risen over the swamps. Mist drifted between the cypress trees, and the air was cool and fresh. Marcus sipped coffee from a thermos and thought the day looked peaceful. How wrong he was. The radio crackled with a sharp signal, and the dispatcher's voice broke the morning calm. "Marcus, we've got a problem near the old levee. Sounds of a struggle, possibly a large animal in trouble." The ranger immediately spilled the rest of his coffee and hit the gas, knowing full well that a large animal in trouble in Florida usually means one thing: a python found another victim. Over the years, Marcus had seen enough. Half-rotted deer bodies with crushed ribs, birds with smashed skulls, remains of pets that had wandered too far from home. But when the ranger got to the scene, what he saw made his heart stop. On the trampled ground near an old road, a huge brown python, at least 13 feet long and as thick as a telephone pole, was writhing. Its muscular body was wrapped, coil after coil, around something small and furry. A lynx. A pregnant female lynx, judging by her rounded belly. She was still breathing, but barely. Her paws helplessly clawed the air, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes were already starting to roll back. The python was tightening its coils slowly and steadily, and with every movement, the lynx grew weaker. Marcus saw her sides trembling as she tried to take in even a small breath of air. But the snake's coils kept getting tighter, squeezing the last bits of life out of its prey. Inside the lynx's belly, the kittens were moving. They were suffocating too, dying along with their mother. Marcus grabbed the radio, shouted out the coordinates, and demanded backup immediately. But he knew there was almost no time left. The lynx was suffocating, and so were her unborn babies. The man pulled a long stick from his truck, the kind he usually used to scare away snakes, and slowly walked closer. But the python sensed danger and squeezed its deadly loops even tighter. The lynx let out a rasping groan, a sound Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. The ranger tried poking the snake's head, but it only tightened the loop more. Every move Marcus made the python's grip even more deadly. "Damn," the ranger whispered, realizing how hopeless the situation was. A shot was too risky. He could hit the lynx. Physically pulling a 13-foot python away was impossible, and every second of delay brought the mother and her babies closer to death. The lynx's eyes were already losing focus, her breathing more and more broken. And at that moment, something crackled in the bushes. Marcus turned and saw a large male lynx slowly coming out of the thicket, strong, with a broad chest and alert ears. A scar crossed his face, clearly an old fighter who had survived more than one battle. He walked slowly, but every movement showed deadly determination. Each step was precise, every motion controlled. This was a predator who knew exactly what he was doing. The male stopped just a few steps from the fight. His yellow eyes flicked from the python to the suffocating female, then to the man with the stick. It looked like he was assessing the situation, calculating his options, choosing the perfect moment to strike. For a second, everything was silent, broken only by the raspy breathing of the dying pregnant lynx. Marcus stood still, watching this wild calculation. A crazy thought flashed through his mind. What if he gave this cat a chance? What if nature had its own ways that people didn't even know about? "Go on, boy," he whispered. "Show that thing who's boss here." The male lynx stepped forward. The python turned its head toward him, flicking its forked tongue and trying to figure out the new threat. Everything froze for a second. Marcus held his breath, realizing this moment would decide the fate of not just the female, but her unborn kittens too. Then it began. The lynx attacked like lightning, not head-on, like an inexperienced animal would, but from the side, aiming right at the base of the python's head. His claws dug into the scaly neck, his teeth clamped down on the spine. The python reflexively loosened its grip and tried to coil around this new enemy. But the male lynx was faster. He leapt back, tearing off a chunk of the snake's flesh, then jumped in again, and again, and again. Each strike was sharp, calculated, deadly. Marcus watched, barely breathing. This wasn't just a fight, it was a precise operation. The lynx didn't give the python a single second to focus on anything but saving its own life. Every bite hit a vital spot: the base of the skull, the joints between vertebrae, nerve clusters. The male lynx moved like a trained killer, someone who knew his enemy's anatomy better than any surgeon. After a few minutes, the freed female collapsed to the ground and gasped for air. Alive, breathing. Her sides were rising and falling, and her eyes were starting to focus again. Inside her belly, the kittens stirred. They too had gotten a life-saving breath of air. Meanwhile, the male struck the final blow. His jaws clamped down on the python's neck just behind the head, and a loud crack of breaking bones filled the air. The 13-foot snake jerked a few times in convulsions, then went limp. The fight was over. The male lynx let go of his kill and slowly walked over to the female. He sniffed her, gently licked her face, and touched her neck with his paw. Then he lay down next to her, pressing his warm fur against her shaking body to keep her warm. His yellow eyes stayed fixed on her, watching every move, every breath. Marcus still couldn't believe his eyes. In 15 years of working in the Everglades, he had seen pythons kill everything, from mice to alligators. But for someone to kill a python of that size with just claws and teeth, and with that kind of precision and skill, it seemed impossible. But the fact was clear. A dead snake lay before him, and two living lynxes were warming themselves in the morning sun. The backup team arrived just in time to see the amazing scene: a dead snake, two living lynxes, and one stunned ranger who was still trying to believe what he had just witnessed. The team's vet, Dr. Andy Morgan, quickly examined the female. Several broken ribs, internal bruising, signs of suffocation. But the worst part, premature labor had started from the stress. "The kittens are trying to be born too early," he said while feeling her belly. "If we don't get her to the center in the next few hours, we'll lose both her and the babies. It's too early for birth and the injuries are too severe." When they carefully moved the female onto a stretcher, the male lynx stood up and followed. Marcus tried to drive him off, but the cat stubbornly came back. When they pushed him away with a stick, he just sat nearby and waited. When they tried to force him into a cage, he growled and showed his claws. But there was no aggression in him, only a stubborn determination not to leave the female alone. In the end, the team decided to take the risk and let the animal ride with them in the open back of the truck. All the way to the wildlife center, the male lynx never took his eyes off the female. He lay next to the stretcher, sometimes gently touching her with his paw, as if checking if everything was okay. When the truck jolted over bumps and the pregnant lynx groaned in pain, he purred quietly, trying to calm her down. Dr. Morgan watched this behavior with professional interest. Lynxes don't form permanent pairs. Males mate and leave, leaving the female to raise the young alone. But this male clearly didn't know the rules, or had chosen to break them. At the Wildlife Center, a real battle for life began. The female lynx was in critical condition. Broken ribs threatened to puncture her lungs, internal bleeding wouldn't stop, and the contractions were getting stronger. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse was fast, and her temperature kept jumping up and down. Dr. Sarah Kelman, the center's lead veterinarian, worked nonstop. IV fluids, painkillers, medicine to stop the bleeding. Her hands moved fast and confidently, but the look on her face showed deep worry. In 30 years of practice, she had saved thousands of animals, but she had never seen a case with this kind of injury mix. The biggest problem was the kittens. They weren't ready to be born, but the stress from the python attack had triggered early labor. If we don't help them come out in the next few hours, they'll die, she told Marcus, who couldn't bring himself to leave. Even if everything goes perfectly, their chances of survival are very low. It's too early, and the injuries are too serious. We need a miracle. The male lynx never left the operating room. The staff tried to isolate him, but he would pace and growl if he couldn't see the female. When they moved him to another room, he scratched at the door and cried softly. In the end, they decided to let him stay in the observation room, behind a glass wall, just in case, where he could watch the operation. The birth took 6 painful hours. Dr. Kelman and her team worked in complete silence, knowing that every minute could be the last. The female lost consciousness several times. Her heart stopped, but the doctors brought her back again and again. Behind the glass, the male lynx paced in circles, sometimes pressing his forehead against the glass, as if trying to send his strength to his dying partner. And then, one by one, 3 tiny kittens were born, blind, helpless, the size of a hamster. The first one was breathing on its own and let out a soft squeak. The second was weaker but still showed signs of life. The third one wasn't breathing at all. Dr. Kelman picked it up and gently massaged its chest, blew air into its tiny nose, and stimulated its blood flow. Minutes passed like hours. The male lynx behind the glass froze, as if he understood that the fate of his family was being decided right now. Then the third kitten squeaked, weakly, almost silently, but it squeaked. The whole team let out a breath at the same time. Dr. Kelman quickly placed the kittens in incubators, checked their reflexes, cleared their airways. Meanwhile, the mother was slowly regaining consciousness. The bleeding had stopped, her breathing had become steady, and her heartbeat had stabilized. When she was moved to the recovery room, the first thing she did was look around for her kittens. They brought them in special carriers, and the lynx mother immediately began licking them, checking on them, warming them. Her maternal instinct was stronger than her injuries and the medicine. The male lynx was allowed into the room only the next day. He walked in slowly, sniffed the air, and made sure his mate and kittens were alive. His yellow eyes scanned every corner of the room, every machine, every person. Then he lay down at the entrance, not too close to bother the doctors, but close enough to watch everything and protect his family from any danger. The center's staff watched this unusual family with both professional curiosity and human tenderness. Everyone knew lynxes didn't form lifelong bonds, but this male clearly had no intention of going anywhere. He brought food to the female, mice, birds he caught on the center grounds. When she was too weak to eat, he waited patiently until she had the strength. When the kittens squeaked, he raised his head and listened carefully, making sure they weren't in danger. At night, he slept beside her bed, one ear always tuned to the kitten's breathing. Dr. Kelman had never seen anything like it. "This behavior is completely untypical for lynxes," she told her colleagues. Usually males are aggressive toward kittens. Sometimes they even kill them. But this one is acting like a devoted father. Maybe the extreme situation, the python attack, the fight for the female's life, changed his instincts. Or maybe it triggered an ancient mechanism of joint protection, something buried deep in the species to defend against a new deadly predator. 2 weeks later, the lynx mother had recovered enough to walk around the room on her own. The kittens had grown, opened their eyes, and started taking their first unsteady steps. They were moved to a large enclosure designed to mimic their natural habitat, with trees, bushes, a small stream, and many hiding spots. And then something amazing happened. The male began to teach the kittens, not the usual motherly things like licking or feeding. The female handled that. He taught them how to recognize danger, identify smells, and understand warning signals. The first lesson happened by accident. The center staff brought a piece of python skin into the enclosure for research. They wanted to see how the family would react to the scent of their recent enemy. The reaction exceeded all expectations. The male immediately went into a defensive stance, hissed, and drove the kittens to the far corner of the enclosure. His fur stood on end, his ears flattened, and his tail puffed up. Then he cautiously approached the skin, sniffed it, bared his teeth, and let out a low warning growl. The kittens watched with wide eyes, memorizing every move their father made. He called them over with a gesture and let them sniff the skin, but only under his close watch, ready to protect them at any moment. He showed them how to sniff properly, how far to stay, how to figure out where the danger was coming from. He's teaching them to fear the right things, Dr. Kelman realized, watching through the surveillance camera. He's showing them, this is the enemy. Remember this smell. Remember how I react. This means death. The following weeks turned into an intense survival course. The male led the kittens around the enclosure, showing them the best spots for ambush, teaching them to move silently, and demonstrating attack techniques using toy mice. But the most important part was that he constantly returned to the topic of snakes. He brought shed skins from different species, taught them to tell the scents apart, and showed how to properly attack a long, wriggling target. 3 months later, once the kittens were strong enough and could hunt small prey, the family was declared ready to return to the wild. It was a very emotional moment for the entire center staff. Dr. Kelman gathered the team and made a formal announcement. We're not just releasing a lynx family, we're releasing the first generation of python fighters. What we witnessed here is the beginning of behavioral evolution. These kittens will grow up knowing how to kill snakes, and they'll pass that knowledge to their own young. The lynx family was released in the same region where the python attack had happened, but in a safer part of the reserve. GPS collars were fitted to track them, dozens of trail cameras were installed, and regular patrols were organized. Marcus Gonzalez personally escorted the family to the release site, feeling a strange mix of pride and worry. When the transport cage was opened, the male stepped out first, looked around, and sniffed the familiar scent of the forest. Then he returned and seemed to call the female. She came out carrying one kitten in her mouth. The male picked up the second. The third kitten, the boldest, ran out on its own and began exploring the new area. The family disappeared into the woods, but not for long. The trail cameras immediately began capturing their movements. During the first weeks of freedom, the family stayed close together, learning the land. The female hunted usual prey, rabbits, birds, small rodents. The male patrolled the edges of the area, marked territory, and chased away other predators. The kittens explored under the watchful eyes of their parents, slowly gaining confidence. But a month later, the trail cameras recorded something strange and unexpected. The male lynx was sitting still by the water's edge, watching something in the bushes. His posture was tense and focused, the stance of a hunter stalking prey. The camera couldn't see what he was watching, but his body language made it clear. He was tracking something big and dangerous. In the next frame, taken half an hour later, the male was carrying something long and dark in his jaws. A young python, about 3 feet long, with its neck cleanly bitten through. At first, the biologist thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the lynx had stumbled upon an inexperienced snake and decided to take an easy kill. But a week later, another camera caught a similar scene, and then again a week after that, and again. The male lynx was actively hunting pythons. He studied their habits, remembered where they lived, and tracked them like a professional predator. The biology team, led by Dr. Kelman, began systematic monitoring. What they discovered changed their entire understanding of wildcat behavior. The male wasn't killing snakes for food. He rarely ate python meat. He was systematically eliminating them as enemies, as a threat to his family and territory. What's more, he was passing this knowledge on to his offspring. The first documented lesson happened in August 2023. A trail camera recorded the male leading his two now-grown kittens to an abandoned python nest. The young lynxes followed their father carefully, sniffing, looking around, ready to run at any moment. The male showed them a clutch of eggs, 23 white ovals, from which new killers were supposed to hatch in a month. He let the kittens sniff, examine, and memorize the scent of their future enemies. Then he methodically destroyed each egg, one by one, piercing the shells and spilling the contents onto the ground. The kittens watched, remembered, and learned. The lesson was clear without words. These are enemies. This is what must be destroyed, not for food, not for play, for survival. A month later, one of the young lynxes, a female, carried out her first solo attack on a python. The snake was small, about 5 feet long, but for a 1-year-old lynx, it was a serious opponent. The camera recorded the entire hunting process. The young lynx tracked the python for almost an hour, waiting for the moment when it was most vulnerable. The snake was sunbathing after a cold night, slow and sleepy. The lynx used exactly the tactic her father had taught her. Quick side attacks, aiming at the base of the head, never letting the snake coil around her. The python was killed cleanly, professionally. The young lynx didn't make a single mistake and didn't suffer a single injury. The father watched from a distance, ready to step in, but he didn't have to. His student exceeded all expectations. By the end of 2023, the Lynx family had become an effective snake hunting team. The female and male worked together. One would distract the python from the front, while the other attacked from behind. The young lynxes quickly picked up the tactics, adjusting them to their own style. They learned to use the terrain, driving snakes into open areas, setting up ambushes near water sources. The lynxes began hunting pythons of different sizes, adjusting their approach. They took small snake hatchlings alone, juveniles in pairs, and adult snakes as a full group. In 2024, reports began coming in from rangers in other regions. Cat claw marks on python scales, raided python nests with destroyed eggs, beheaded snakes, more and more often. Dr. Kelman expanded the monitoring zone and set up more trail cameras. What they discovered soon surprised even the most experienced biologists. Other lynx families in the area had started copying the behavior, at first awkwardly, making mistakes. Some individuals died during failed attacks on large snakes. But over time, the technique improved. The lynxes learned from each other at territorial boundaries, passing knowledge not just to their offspring, but also to their neighbors. The first documented case of a coordinated attack by multiple families occurred in September 2024. A giant python, almost 16 feet long, had settled near an old pond and was terrorizing the area. 2 lynx families joined forces against the shared threat. 4 surrounded the snake's head, 3 attacked the middle of the body, and 1 targeted the tail. The python couldn't focus on any single attacker. After 2 hours of struggle, the snake was dead, the final blow delivered by the very same female who had been rescued 4 years earlier. After the victory, the lynxes quietly returned to their own territories. A few weeks later, the pond came back to life. Birds and small animals returned. "This is no longer just instinct," wrote Dr. Kelman. "The lynxes are developing a strategy for fighting an invasive species and passing that knowledge on to their young. We are witnessing accelerated behavioral adaptation." By early 2025, the statistics were impressive. Biologists were recording more and more successful lynx attacks on pythons. In January, 23 cases. In February, 31. In March, 47. In April, 62. The lynxes had mastered hunting pythons of all ages. They learned to exploit the snake's weaknesses, their slowness in cold weather, their poor reaction after eating, and their impaired vision during shedding. The first rescued family became the training center. The old male patiently demonstrated snake hunting techniques to young lynxes from other families. His grown children also began training the younger generation, each specializing in certain skills. By spring 2025, the forests were home to a second generation of lynxes for whom hunting pythons was routine. They were growing up knowing that snakes were enemies, to be destroyed not for food, but for the right to exist in their own homeland. In March, Dr. Kellman published an article in the journal Nature titled Rapid Predator Adaptation to Invasive Species. Her main conclusion: an ecosystem can adapt to outside threats much faster than previously believed, not in thousands of years, but in just a few, if there are flexible enough species capable of changing their behavior. For Ranger Marcus, something else mattered most. The lynx family he had helped save had become a whole dynasty. The female, who had nearly died in the coils of a python, now hunted snakes successfully herself. Her grown-up kittens could handle 6-foot-long juvenile pythons. The old male, the hero of that December morning, was still patrolling the territory. Just recently, Marcus even saw him watching as the young lynxes set up an ambush near a watering hole for a large python. When the hunt ended in success, the male walked up, sniffed the kill, and let out a soft, approving purr. By summer 2025, the numbers were impressive. In May, 87 attacks. In June, 114. In July, more than 150. And those were only the documented cases. The behavior was spreading through the entire lynx population in South Florida. The young learned from the older ones. Families shared experience. Some groups began to specialize. Some searched for nests. Others hunted at night. And others worked in the swamps. Florida was still full of pythons. There were hundreds of thousands left. But for the first time in 30 years, they finally had serious opponents. Smart, fast-learning enemies, passing down their knowledge from generation to generation. Every month brought new reports. Hundreds of pythons killed, dozens of snake nests destroyed, hundreds of egg clutches wiped out. The lynxes had become guardians of the ecosystem, nature's attempt to restore balance. Florida now echoes again with the sounds of life. Still cautious, not everywhere yet, but more confident with each passing day. Birds are returning to the groves. Small animals peek out from their burrows. Even the alligators seem more at ease in their swamps. Nature is searching for a way out of the situation that people forced it into. And it found that way in the form of a lynx who refused to give up, who showed that sometimes all it takes for things to change is one brave decision by a father to protect his family.